All right, hello everyone. In my project, as you know, I am focusing on Orientalism as it can be seen through various different video games. I'm going to be looking at several examples, which I will soon talk about. And the primary theme that I want to keep returning to is Orientalism as seen as a type of escape for individuals in the sense that they are promised this sort of exotic, different land to discover. In addition, the medium of video games allows for players to participate in several various Orientalist fantasies, if you will, as they can immerse themselves in this digital world and interact with the environment without putting themselves in any danger or seeing any consequences from their actions or without really even just leaving their house. So, before we get into it, I want to talk about two sub themes that I have identified for this project um, that are going to be particularly important in our understanding of this context. They both should be pretty straightforward. The first is exoticization. This is often, but not always, sexualized, depicting a sort of mysterious, wondrous land full of exquisite sights to be consumed in some sense or another by the Western audience. The second example is what I will refer to as barbarization, which is basically the demeaning of these places and populations to stereotypes of them being these quote unquote backwards and almost primitive civilizations. Um, with that, we've obviously seen both of these examples a lot in various readings and art and whatnot in class. With that, I'm going to move on to the video game examples themselves. The first that I want to talk about is the Assassin's Creed series. This series follows a secret organization of assassins throughout various historically significant eras. In most of the games, it takes place in a European or American city such as Rome, Boston, New York, and London at specific historical times, such as the American Revolution. Um, with that being said, I want to look at two specific games which are a little different. These are Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which came out in 2013, and Assassin's Creed Origins, which came out in 2017. So the two images on the left are from Black Flag, and in this game the player controls a pirate traveling through the Spanish-occupied Caribbean in the 18th century. The two images on the right are from Origins, which take place in ancient Egypt, and the relevance of these two games is that they both take place in an area that is not considered to be westernized or a dominant power. And so the inherent nature of these games allows for players to interact with various different historic civilizations and sites as they are thought to have been. These two games are obviously no exception for this. In Black Flag, the player can get into fights with local pirates or criminals, and then hire a group of prostitutes to distract the royal guard and thus get away with more crimes and acts of violence. In Assassin's Creed Origins, the player has to carry out several different missions and assassinations given by Cleopatra herself. So, in both of these examples, the player is encouraged to partake in both of the previously mentioned themes, the exoticized and the barbarized. And on one hand, they are supposed to explore these exotic and long gone lands with mysterious treasures and spectacles, while at the same time, they are able to play a small role in the much larger, seemingly mindless bloodsheds and violences of history. So, moving on to the next example, and also probably the most disturbing, is called Kuma War, which represents a whole new genre of post 9/11 nationalistic, essentially propaganda video games. This game was released in 2004 by Kuma Reality Games, which was an organization that consists almost entirely of retired U.S. military officers. You can probably see where this is going. In this game, the player can choose to play in recreations of various actual missions across Iraq and Afghanistan, which were supported, by records from the Department of Defense. And this company would periodically release several new missions, which the player could download onto their computer all the way until the final one released in 2011, in which, I am not kidding, the player could kill Osama bin Laden in a supposedly accurate recreation of his actual compound in Pakistan. This, in and of itself, represents a new type of chapter in these types of quote-unquote historical video games, if you will. With the previous example of Assassin's Creed, the player can either be a spectator to or play a small and insignificant part of a very vague reimagination of some really old and long past historical event. Whereas in this game, the game recreates the supposed exact setting of an event that occurred in the player's lifetime, which they almost definitely remember. And thus, the reality of the video game increases that much, in that the player can pretend they are an actual Navy SEAL raiding Osama bin Laden's compound and single handedly killing him. And to make matters worse, the developers of this game paid a crazy attention to detail in certain areas. They used actual news footage from the front lines of the conflicts, and they used real events, as I said, as the basis for their missions. And they even used real weapons that were used in the missions down to their accurate sound effects. At the same time, the enemies that they were fighting in the game were essentially a loose conglomerate of visual motifs that are, at least in the westernized mind, associated with Muslims, such as dark skin color, a head cover of some sort, and loose clothing. And so what I'm essentially trying to get at here is that literal sound effects from certain weapons in the game were presented with more agency and accuracy than what is supposed to represent actual human lives. And so this is obviously a very big and very drastic example of barbarization in video games, the second of the two sub-themes that I proposed earlier. And so the next example that I want to focus on is from the Legend of Zelda series. It is Ocarina of Time, which was released in 1998. So in the larger canon, or lore, if you will, of this game series, there is a group of people called the Gerudo who live in the desert and utilize several visual stereotypes a Western viewer would clearly likely associate with perhaps a type of older, quote-unquote, Eastern land, as you can see in these images, sort of, and we'll get more into it in a bit. These Gerudo people are notorious in this game for being a sort of conniving band of thieves, and to make matters worse, the symbol used for them, as you can see, was originally a crescent and a star, which is very clearly associated with the Islamic faith. It was obviously changed for obvious reasons. And then the final example that I want to talk about is from the game called Breath of the Wild, that is a later installment in the Legend of Zelda series. This came out in 2017, so only 3 years ago. And in this game, once again, does the player encounter the Gerudo people. However, here they consist entirely of women, and they all live in a walled city in the desert in which no men are allowed to enter. And so the protagonist, who's named Link, who you can see on the bottom left image there, is supposed to be this great manly hero warrior. He, as part of the game, has to get into this town to get information from someone. He obviously cannot do so because he's a male. And so, in order to do so, he has to dress up in women's clothing in order to sneak into this town. On the middle bottom image right there, you can see that outfit that he is in. This is obviously problematic for a number of reasons, but in this context, we are going to focus solely on the themes that are relevant to Orientalism here. So we are seeing the player control a white male individual entering a space that is designed exclusively for women where he is not supposed to be. This is obviously very similar to the harem motif, and I wanted to, on the next slide, draw a similarity between this particular image which is a screenshot from the game, and compare it to these other two images of harem paintings. As you can see here, the video game is utilizing different visual decorative styles that are loosely associated with visual Orientalist themes. And at the same time, these paintings also call upon a similar vague styles that were, we know, most often done by white Western male artists who would have actually never been able to set foot in such a space. And so this is obviously calling a lot more upon the exoticized sub-theme of the two.